Now, we've recently gone over a couple of polls. We've obviously seen the big one that clearly indicates that people want another say on basically, potentially rejoining the EU or even, rejoining the customs union and single market, something that Leave said was going to happen. Again, my famous Daniel Hannan quote, which I quote all the time. Honestly, I've got to find a way if I can ever get a soundboard and just put that on the soundboard, just press the button, just hear Daniel Hannan say, "Only a fool would leave the single market and customs union." I'm really gonna get that's something I think I've got to invest in. Think definitely. Um, so we've seen that one, but we also saw recently the YouGov poll, which expressly asked Leavers. They said, "Why? Why have you changed your mind on Brexit?" And the third most responded to one was very simple: "We feel lied to," or "I think we were lied to on the benefits of Brexit." And of course you were. I'd hate to say it to you guys, but yes, you were ultimately very, very much lied to by a lot of con men. And as James O'Brien has often said, you've got to have compassion for the conned, not the con men. And I've always said very clearly, you've got to split the Brexiteers, the people who were selling Brexit, so like Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Katie Hoey, etc., etc. And then you've got the people who voted for Brexit. I think you've got to make a very clear distinction between those two. And then when I've ever said, I've always tried to do that. When I've sort of done this, I've expressly said, Brexit voters or, Brexiteers. And I've tried to sort of make that distinction very clear. But this is interesting because this is from a local newspaper. And it is very, very, very rarely in a local newspaper that they will take on the question of Brexit. And certainly what has in and happened around the area of Brexit. Normally it is an impact of Brexit, but he's never really asking people about that. But the fact that we have got this, as I've said very clearly, there has been a big sea change in this. The fact that, yes, it is now generally becoming more and more acknowledged Brexit was a failure. People were lied to. And that there is no real Brexit benefit, that all these benefits and things that the Brexiteers sort of lied to people about that were going to be amazing turned out, of course, not to be true. And now people are, realizing that, because there's another thing we've said before. You can only keep a lie going for so long. Sooner or later, your hot air balloon of lies runs out of warm air to keep it up, and you have no more lies to keep it up, to keep it inflated. That's what's happening now. That is very clearly what is happening now. And it's happened, to be honest, a lot faster than certainly we thought would happen. I thought we would maybe be another, 5, 6, or 7 years before we were here, but we've got here a lot more quicker. And I think that's very, very telling, especially going into future parliaments, the implosion certainly of the Conservative Party. What discussion does that form in the implosion? Are people going to be open and honest and say, yeah, Brexit was a big part of why we imploded, and the direction that we went wasn't a good one? That will be very interesting to see if that discussion takes place in the Conservative Party. We've also got potential discussions also probably going to happen in Labour as well, in and around Brexit. So there's a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe, and then going in the direction that we want to go in. So that is very good. But we're going to go over this because I think this is fascinating, because obviously Derbyshire here was, as it says, Brexit heartland. And when people in these heartlands are changing their minds, and more specifically saying that they felt lied to, that becomes a very, very interesting point that we have to really start to capitalize on. So Let's go into this because, like I say, it's a very interesting article. But as always, before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and an affiliation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's also the YouTube thank you button down below as well, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well that you can join as well. So, as always, over we go today to Derbyshire Live to have a look at what they've had to say on this very, very interesting revelation. With voters in Derbyshire, the Brexit heartland, say they feel lied to, and things have gotten worse since the crucial vote. So, voters in the area of Derbyshire that decided by the largest margin to leave the European Union in 2016 say they feel lied to by those who advocated Brexit. And life in the town has gotten worse since the referendum. Bolsover voted against remaining in the EU by 70.8% to just 29.2% on a respectable turnout of over 72%, the eighth highest margin in the country. But now, polling suggests that people are regretting the momentous decision that not long ago dominated conversations between friends and families. Statista, for example, concluded in December that 51% of people in Great Britain thought it was the wrong decision to leave the European Union, compared with 34% who thought it was the right one. Some in Bolsover seem to have reversed their stance, and a number of those who voted leave in the former mining town have told Derbyshire Live that they now feel they were told mistruths by those vying for people's hearts and minds 6 years ago, and would vote differently were they given the chance again. So people have changed their minds. People really have changed their minds, and minds are changing because Brexit was sold as this panacea, that this was going to be the solution to all these problems. And of course, as we said back then, no, the EU is not the problem of our country. It was Tory austerity. It had been at that point years of Tory austerity that had hammered towns like Bolsover. And it had been only the EU that had been giving money to these areas to help fund projects, to help fund council stuff and things like that. So, and of course, that money is now no longer there. As we've said before, the UK's attempt, the Shared Prosperity Fund, isn't even fully funding some of these areas. And we've seen Wales lose out on millions of pounds. Same for Scotland. Same for even areas in England as well. So we told you so this was going to happen. And as I say, I'm really glad that people are changing their minds. And to be honest, good. People who do change their minds, this is where we have to go. Okay, guys, excellent. Welcome on board. Took you a while to get there, but welcome on board. And we have to sort of welcome these people on board now, and we have to start onboarding them into sort of the rejoin process and start getting them involved in conversations about how bad Brexit has gone and what we can do next to sort of help reverse some of this stuff. I think that's where we have to go. So they continue. Others, however, remain steadfast, suggesting that the present problems, such as the long NHS waiting times and the rapid rise of the cost of living, are down to other factors, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and the government's mishandling of Brexit, rather than leaving the EU itself. And again, yes, the pandemic will have, a lot of issues, but you can't hide behind, COVID forever. And there are clear issues we can see of where it has been a very clear, that is a pandemic issue, that is clearly a Brexit issue, very clearly. So sitting in the Country Yard Bistro on Cavendish Walk, Diane Pickering, 62, who worked for a social care for over 9 years, has become disenfranchised since voting for Brexit and thinks the sector she used to work in has borne the brunt of the systemic problems. She said, "I don't think it's changed. It's got worse than it was. I used to vote and voted Labour always. I've always been working class, but I don't vote for anyone now. They're all the same. I do feel sorry for a lot of older people and the nurses and carers. They just don't get help. I worked in care for 9 years with all those Alzheimer and dementia. And for the work that they do, they've got nothing extra. Ms. Parkin added that immigration was an important consideration for her back in 2016. She said, I think those promoting Brexit were telling lies. Don't get me wrong, I'm not racist, but they're fetching all these immigrants into our country, and my daughter, who was born here, born and bred here, can't get no help with a council house. That's not entirely down to immigration. I'm sorry, love, but it's not entirely down to immigration. That's because you've had a government not building social housing for years. You know, um, again, that's not an immigration problem. That's not an EU problem. That's, as we said before at the beginning, that is a British problem and a governmental problem of not building these social housing that allow for new council houses. So if there were another referendum tomorrow, Miss Parkin says she would not vote. She added, I'm sorry, Duck. The country has gone. Since we've come out, it's gotten worse than it was. They've lied to us all. Sitting next to Diane was Sue Tucker. Sue Thacker, a 50 and a former Scott Coop, and a former farmer, Scott Coop, 56. And Mrs. Thacker is also concerned about the NHS. She said, I know of a woman who had to wait 31 hours for an ambulance, and after she fell in the kitchen with doctors, it was also taking a week before you get in. Again, the NHS was not an EU issue. The EU had nothing to do with the NHS. Absolutely nothing. That was always, guess what? Say it with me. That was a British government issue. And unfortunately, it was these, again, the Brexit pushers saying, oh yes, don't worry, if we leave the EU, waiting times will go down. That was a promise they made to people back in 2016, along with that 360 million extra a week to the NHS. So we're back to it. So when asked how she voted in 2016, she said, don't ask me. I can't remember all those years ago. But Ms. Thacker also expressed concerns about the levels of immigration. Again, immigration is not an issue. It really isn't. But it's just people haven't really been told the truth, and they get, these scare stories about it's like, oh, but yeah, it's a massive problem, but it's something that MPs need to be more honest about. Really, sort of the immigration is far more positive than it is actually negative to the UK. And if it is, again, as people like to make it a numbers game, well, there are far more people being born in the UK than there are immigrations. So you could apply a lot of these numbers immigration arguments to people being born in the UK. And all of a sudden, I think people would realize just how ridiculous a lot of these numbers arguments really are when it comes to immigration. But there you go. She said, we shouldn't have it in this country. They have houses and everything paid for them. Again, not true, but there you go. Ms. Coop said, at the end of the day, the Conservatives aren't doing anything. It is a load of beep on immigration, she added. There's supposed to be someone out there stopping all the, quote, boats across the English Channel, but they've done nothing. The government sends so many thousands abroad, but what about this country? Again, I think there's a limited understanding, really. But you can always see the right wing arguments here sort of pouring in. But again, that's unfortunately typical in some of these areas. Wrapped up during a very chilly winter's morning walk in the town. Former dinner lady and bus driver for 32 years, Margaret and Trevor Jones, aged 71 and 74, suggest that the UK is not yet distant enough from the EU, and that other factors have exacerbated the current national problems. Again, that's not true before, but there you go. Like I said, that's your opinion. You're wrong on it, Margaret and Trevor, but there you go. Mrs. Jones said, I don't think it's Brexit made any difference, really. with COVID coming straight after it. We've had to put up with we put up with it afterwards. Brexit's the best thing for this country, but we don't seem to have benefited as we thought we would. Then why don't you think what? Mr. Jones said, we wanted to come out, and we wanted what we used to have. We lost our identity. What? What do you mean? Lost again? Oh, what do you mean lost our identity? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? And we're giving money to other countries that don't need it. What do you mean? Oh, again, what does that even mean? Oh, you've cut. We've actually cut. You know, the money. That was a whole soft power argument in the Conservative Party. Just yeah. Sorry, this is infuriating. This has reminded me similar arguments. You know, I often love now and again just to go to the pub, just sit there, just have a quiet drink, and you just take in the atmosphere. And very often you hear these arguments, and it's just infuriating beyond words. Anyway, where were we? Yeah, so we send money to the countries that don't need it. It would be better spent here on the NHS, except they're not spending money in NHS. But there you go. We're sending millions to China. What? Just what? We're sending millions to China whilst working people here are using food banks. I want clarification on what exactly those millions we are sending to China is. You should always look after your own first. At our age, it looks like we're going back to when we were kids. We didn't have any money, and our parents didn't have any money. No benefits like they have now. It's like going back in time with the energy crisis. We don't have to worry about that. Oh, sorry, we didn't have to worry about that. We had no central heating, no indoor bathrooms. I can appreciate people are having a tough time, especially nurses, but everybody is in the same situation. Jesus Christ. Jesus. We are also still under their, quote, EU rules. What rules exactly? You mean regulations? What? How? This is not affecting the energy crisis. But again, if I were there in that report, I'd ask for clarification what he meant by that. I thought when we came out, we'd have our own rules. We've always had our own rules, but there you go. But we're still being ruled by the EU, Mr. Jones added. We're not going forwards, we're going backwards. What on earth? Yeah. Yeah, that's my response to that. Jesus. Anyway, passing down the same street not long after, the Joneses were Marilyn and Professor Gordon McColvin, 75 and 76, a retired teacher and an industrial materials researcher. They voted to remain in 2016 and believe that Brexit has unequivocally worsened the area's fortunes. Mr. Colvin said, "We never should have left. We should have made stronger ties, not less. When you order something, it takes 3 months to arrive whilst it gets through the necessary paperwork, and then you don't want it when it comes. We're a little island floating off the Atlantic somewhere." Sense. You see, there is sense in these areas. Honestly, there is sense. There's people who talk genuine sense in these areas. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Colvin also said, "It is absolutely atrocious. We've gone backwards. We don't make anything here now. We're not big enough. It's not the 19th century anymore. We're not part of a huge empire now. We're part of nothing. Just an add-on that is left us counting for nothing." When asked if they think voters were misinformed, Mrs. Colvin exclaimed, "We were downright lied to. Things like the NHS promises our dentist had to go home and nurses had to go home who had been here for 15 to 20 years. It's very wrong. We have to control our borders, but not in the way they did it. Professor McHolden also added, we had an interchange of people and skills going back and forth with the EU. There was a common basis, but now we need to pay for social services with businesses that don't exist anymore. And she set off to finish the shopping. Mrs. Colvin looked back and concluded, there are two lots of people in Bolsover. The people who have been here for generations, who voted to leave and once hated Margaret Thatcher, and they still do hate her, and they still would hate her. They're against anything that closes the pits down. I understand wholeheartedly why the area voted how it did. They've really suffered. Families here during the 1980s were literally starving. Some had no shoes. That memory lingers, and it's still going to linger for at least another couple of generations. I actually quite agree with her on this. There is still that sense of, that pit closure that's happened. Again, I live in a former mining town as well, so I still see that. I still see that memory. It's still very, very much there. Very much there. Where we so bring a couple of generations. Then you have those who have moved into the area who usually have a different view. We're definitely the latter. It's a smashing place to live, but it's running out of facilities fast. Two business people in Bolsover High Street who wished not to be named suggest that they have had a change of heart. One said, we're the same as everybody else. It's not altered immigration. People are still coming across, and people believed that Brexit would alter that, but it didn't. Of course, it wasn't going to alter that. But there you go. But at least, again, like I say, they've changed their mind and at least come to the realization that, yeah, they were lied to on that. Whether we'd still be in a bad situation now, I don't know. I voted to leave and I regret it. In a one way, I do feel we were misled. I felt we were run by Brussels and we'd save a few quid. But my daughter, she was different and we almost fell out. She thought the old ones aren't thinking about the young ones, and she was probably right, actually. I was hoping they'd go for a second referendum. I would have voted differently. Again, I want to admit point that out because I think that's very worth pointing out. There were a lot of people who voted one way, thinking that there would be a second referendum because prior to it, there was tons of talk. Even Jacob Rees-Mogg, there's the video of him standing up in Parliament saying, yes, you can have more, multiple referendums on this. There was even Nigel Farage's original plan that he was going to submit in order to sort of become the official leave campaign. His whole official idea was to have multiple referendums taking place over to leave the EU. Do we stay in the single market and customs union, etc., etc.? The leave the EU one, there were going to be two. There was going to be a 5-year cool down period between the first and the second vote. So this whole idea that there was going to be a second referendum, I think a lot of people generally voted, in some cases, in the way they did for the first referendum because they wanted to spit in David Cameron's eye. I really think there are a lot of people who voted leave, didn't really care about the whole Brussels argument, but they knew there was going to be a second one so that they could change their vote the second time. I think there were a lot of people like that. But his colleague, who also voted leave, added, in some ways, we're still attached to the EU, aren't we? COVID has caused some of the inflation. It's not all Brexit, I believe. The result was partly due to immigration and all the silly rules, straight bananas, and all that rubbish. The money we were paying them. Again, thinking about, again, the silly rules argument. Now, all regulation exists for a reason. Most of these Brexiteers, even now, still do not want to admit or even talk about regulation, why these regulations exist. We did an entire video just recently on Jacob Rees-Mogg and a guy, William Arnett, I think his name was, on Conservative Home, about wanting to get rid of chemical regulations. And then I had to go, well, hold on, why do you want to get rid of these chemical regulations? Because most of these chemical regulations that they want to get rid of, that they are talking about getting rid of, are a ton of health and safety regulations, protecting workers who work in those environments, protecting the environment. And they do not want to have those conversations because they know if they have those conversations, well, actually, most people would agree with keeping those protections. So they don't want to have that open and honest conversations. Hence why they go, oh, silly questions like, bendy bananas. Again, immigration was never, ever going to be changed because of Brexit. Again, perfect example, what's going on now. And of course, all the money we were paying into them. Well, we said it then, and I said this should have been something that the Remain campaign hit big on. That it is the best investment anyone could ever have, because for every pound we gave the EU, we got 10 back. That is an amazing investment. And this guy being a business person, I guarantee you, if you went to him and said, look, if you give me £1, I will give you 10 back. Is that a good investment? His answer would be yes. And then you put that to them. That's what was happening when we're in the EU. Now, I'm sure you disagree in some way, but no, that's true. But of course, there you go. I think that's it. Yep. So yeah, people are changing their minds. Not, of course, completely, but we're getting there. We are slowly but surely. We are getting there. That is for certain. And the fact that a lot of people are now coming to realization that actually, yes, we were lied to when it came to the conversations in and around Brexit is a fantastic revelation. It really is an amazing revelation that we were getting to this point, that we are coming here. I mean, we are getting there slowly but surely. And of course, there's still the lingering doubts by many people saying, oh, it's not, Brexit, it's whatever, COVID, whatever excuse they'll come up with next, because there will always be another excuse. It won't be Brexit, it'll be something else. Again, with the whole EU laws, well, what EU laws? Just silence the crickets. You can hear them. But yeah, I'd like to say I come from myself a former mining town, so I do recognise one of the arguments that the woman said there about, of course, like the legacy of like the deindustrialization, sort of the long memory of that still does exist. Certainly up in the north and in those former mining towns, so that is still a very prevalent thing that Boris Johnson fed on into. Certainly in the sort of whole get Brexit done and the whole levelling up thing, that caused, again, many people to sort of, hold their noses and vote Conservative in some cases for the very first time. As we said there, the whole, they hate Margaret Thatcher for what they did to sort of the mining industry and the pits in their area, and remember that. And they hate her for it. And in this case, Boris Johnson came along and to them was palatable enough and at least making the right noises for them to put their box next to, of course, the Conservatives at the 2019 general election. So, as always, like I say, this is still, I think, an ongoing conversation. I think it will certainly evolve. As you can see, there's still a lot of right-wing nonsense out there that really needs to be sort of tackled. And like I say, we do tackle it on here. I doubt any of those people in the article will ever see this particular video, but hey ho. So, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, etc., etc. Like I say, you can spot the channel down below that way. Or there's, like I say, share, and, of course, let me know what you think about some of these arguments in the video. Do you recognize them in your own hometown or where you live? I know, certainly, again, coming from a very sort of similar area, I recognize a lot of these complaints. And, of course, I disagree with the vast majority of them. Again, there are lots of reasons. And again, I think it's really politicians being open and honest enough to have these conversations, especially in and around immigration. And I think it's about time we really have that conversation. And I think politicians have not got to be scared to back down from having that conversation. So As always, guys, like I say, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.